What if I told you the most explosive shift in global power didn't happen in Washington, Moscow, or Beijing, but in a quiet room in New Delhi? No tanks, no coups, just one signature and $15 billion that could shatter the West's control over Africa forever. Because the moment Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat across from Prime Minister Narendra Modi, a fuse was lit beneath the old world order. Cameras flashed, diplomats smiled, but beneath the polished wood and empty formalities, a revolution was underway. Oil for factories, sovereignty for steel. A nation once dismissed as irrelevant, Burkina Faso, just rewrote the rules of global power. And the question you should be asking is not what they signed, but who lost control because of it. For decades, Africa was chained to aid, deals dressed as generosity, built on interest payments and foreign dependency. But this wasn't a loan. It wasn't charity. It was something far more dangerous. It was a handshake between equals, $15 billion in direct investment, Indian capital into African soil, no World Bank, no IMF, no Western approval, and no place left to hide for those who thought Africa would always kneel. So ask yourself, who really controls the future of Africa? And more importantly, why are they so afraid of losing it now? This isn't about oil. This isn't about India. This is about what happens when a small, underestimated nation dares to cut the leash and the entire global order starts to tremble. But before we go further, understand this. The ink is dry. The headlines are out. But the consequences, they've only just begun. The pact unveiled. What did Traoré actually sign? So, what exactly did Ibrahim Traoré sign that day? Not a vague promise, not a symbolic handshake, but a binding, strategic, industrial, and military pact worth $15 billion, crafted not to impress, but to transform. This is not the story of another African nation giving away raw resources for pennies. This is the story of Burkina Faso refusing to be anyone's resource colony ever again. At the heart of the deal, energy. $4 billion will go toward the full-scale extraction and refining of Burkina Faso's oil reserves, not to be shipped out raw, not to enrich traders in Geneva or speculators in London, but to be processed right here on Burkinabe soil. The construction of domestic refineries, pipelines, and petrochemical plants is not just infrastructure, it's economic defiance. For decades, Africa was told it could only export crude and buy back finished fuel at inflated prices. This pact ends that dependency. But it doesn't stop at oil. India is injecting $5 billion more into energy infrastructure, building solar arrays, storage facilities, and distribution networks that will finally bring stable power to homes and factories across the nation. This isn't just about powering machines. It's about powering sovereignty. Then comes steel, $3 billion for steel and manufacturing plants. Foundries and factories will rise where there was once only dust. These aren't just jobs, they're futures. Welding, machining, fabrication, skills that feed an industrial economy, not just an extractive one. Defense. Traoré didn't forget what it takes to stay free. That's why $2 billion has been earmarked for joint defense manufacturing. But here's the difference. Not arms deals, not imports, not dependency. Burkinabe soldiers will soon carry weapons made in Burkina Faso, designed with Indian technology, but built by African hands. That includes small arms, vehicles, communication systems, and the training facilities to ensure full control, because a sovereign nation cannot borrow its security. And lastly, perhaps most critically, $1 billion for agriculture, telecommunications, and training. Why? Because factories without skilled workers are empty shells. because oil without educated engineers is just liquid, and because a nation without food sovereignty is a nation still kneeling. Each investment comes not as a loan, but as FDI, foreign direct investment. No ballooning debt, no hidden conditions. India doesn't walk away with mineral rights or military bases. Instead, both sides bet on mutual growth. But ask yourself, is this too good to be true? The devil, after all, lives in the details, and in Africa, too many deals have turned to dust. So what makes this different? First, transparency. Traoré has made the entire pact publicly accessible. Every clause, every deadline. No offshore accounts, no backdoor arrangements. A public oversight council is being formed, composed of citizens, not just politicians, to track the implementation. Second, ownership. Burkina Faso retains control of all resources involved. India is not buying land, controlling refineries, or owning strategic assets. It is participating, not dictating. Third, value retention. For the first time in modern Burkinabe history, a major foreign partnership does not export raw material. It builds the capacity to refine, produce, and sell finished goods at home. That's how you flip the script. In the old model, 90% of Africa's resource value vanished overseas. In this model, 80% stays local. And yet, the stakes are high. This pact could launch a new economic dawn, or become just another dream buried beneath corruption and incompetence. The blueprint is bold. The money is real. The infrastructure is coming. But will it be ours? Or will it be stolen again? The clock is ticking. Ground must be broken. Engineers must be trained. Oversight must be strict, because every delay, every misstep, every loophole opens the door for failure, and that is the question hanging over every street in Ouagadougou. Will this deal change lives or just headlines? The world reacts. Shock, fear, and a battle for narrative. The moment news of the $15 billion pact broke, the world didn't blink. It flinched. In Paris, the Foreign Ministry held an emergency closed-door meeting. In Washington, senior officials from the State Department scrambled for intelligence. In Brussels, EU diplomats called it an alarming realignment. And in quiet, powerful corners of London's financial districts, someone whispered the word they all feared: precedent. This wasn't just a deal. It was a message. That Africa, starting with a landlocked, underestimated nation like Burkina Faso, was no longer waiting for permission to rise. That message sent a tremor through the old world order. For decades, the West operated under the assumption that African sovereignty would always come second to Western stability, that oil, minerals, and markets would always flow through the same pipelines, banks, and currencies. But Traoré just rewrote that assumption, not in protest, but in practice. In Western media, the backlash was swift and coordinated. The India-Burkina Pact, dangerous gamble or desperate move, read one headline. Burkina Faso, playing with fire, said another. CNN ran a segment quoting unnamed U.S. officials warning of regional destabilization. The BBC questioned the legitimacy of Traoré's transitional government. Financial Times painted the deal as opaque and risky. But behind the headlines, another kind of fear simmered. What if this actually works? Because if Burkina Faso can leapfrog past decades of dependency through bold alignment with new partners, then what stops Mali, or Niger, or Chad from following? What happens if the African continent begins forming its own industrial axis outside the IMF, outside the franc, outside Washington's approval? In short, what happens if Africa wakes up? This is what scares them, not chaos, but competence. Not rebellion, but results. Traoré, fully aware of the geopolitical storm he had triggered, responded with clarity, not chaos. "We are not choosing sides," he said during a national broadcast. "We are choosing our future." That single sentence reverberated through the continent. In Bamako, students marched in support. In Niamey, farmers gathered to watch the announcement on community projectors. In Ghana, editorial pages debated, should Accra follow Traoré's path? Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso itself, the response was mixed, but electric. The markets buzzed with curiosity. Radio stations held round-the-clock debates. Taxi drivers in Ouagadougou tuned into call-in shows, demanding answers. Teachers, soldiers, shopkeepers, everyone had an opinion. Not all of it was optimistic. Some feared the deal was too big, too fast, that it would be hijacked by corrupt middlemen or buried under red tape, that Burkina Faso lacked the bureaucratic strength to absorb such rapid transformation. Others worried about India's motives. Are they really our partners or just the next empire? One commentator asked. But even skeptics agreed on one thing. This was different, because unlike the endless parade of foreign delegations with vague promises, this pact came with hard numbers, timelines, infrastructure, and accountability. And then came the counterattack, not from journalists, but from algorithms. Within 48 hours of the announcement, social media in West Africa exploded with misinformation, fake headlines, doctored videos, bots claiming the pact was already collapsing. A rumor spread that Indian troops would soon arrive to secure assets. Another post alleged Traoré had given away gold rights to Delhi. None of it was true, but it didn't need to be. Doubt is cheaper than truth and far more contagious. Burkina Faso intelligence traced some of the disinformation to accounts linked to Western political consulting firms. Others came from anonymous servers in Europe, but by then, the damage had begun. Traoré acted swiftly. A joint task force was formed to monitor online threats. A public campaign was launched called Burkina Se Voit, meaning Burkina sees itself, an effort to counter lies with facts. And in a surprising twist, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi released a joint statement reaffirming that no military presence, no extractive rights, and no secret agreements were involved in the deal. It worked. The narrative war didn't end, but it shifted. By the end of the week, Burkina Faso's streets were filled with murals, slogans, and handwritten posters. "We don't want aid. We want industry. Don't fear our future. Build it with us." Burkina will not blink. So now, ask yourself, when the people believe in the pact more than the press does, who's telling the truth? From streets to statesmen, the civil and political shockwave. In the weeks following the historic signing, Burkina Faso did not sleep. You could feel it in the streets of Ouagadougou, buzzing markets, tense debates in cafes, and classrooms lit up by the first signs of steady electricity. But beneath the excitement, another reality began to emerge. This wasn't just an oil deal. It was a ticking clock placed at the heart of a fragile nation. Because when you promise transformation, you trigger expectation, and when expectations rise faster than delivery, political pressure becomes a fire. Traoré knew this. Within days, his government launched the One Pact, One People initiative, a campaign designed to link every major investment in the India deal to a real, visible change in local communities. Electricity poles began appearing in districts long forgotten. Engineering scholarships were announced for students in Bobo Dioulasso. Road construction accelerated. Local mayors were ordered to report weekly progress. Ministries were forced to publish updated timelines, and, for the first time in years, the people were watching, not in despair, but in anticipation. But with anticipation comes scrutiny. Civil society groups began asking hard questions. Where exactly are the factories going? Who will own them? How will employment be guaranteed for Burkina Faso citizens? What contracts were signed to protect national interest if political winds shift? In Parliament, opposition voices, though fragmented, began to grow louder. This deal cannot become another elite trap, warned one lawmaker. We've seen projects come and go. Burkina Faso needs results, not ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Even within the military ranks that brought Traoré to power, tension surfaced. Some commanders feared that rapid civilian economic transformation could outpace military control. Others worried that India's presence, however cooperative, might bring unwanted surveillance or strategic entanglements. Meanwhile, youth organizations, usually fragmented, found unity in action. University students launched apps to track infrastructure development. Journalists created watchdog portals. Farmers' cooperatives demanded access to modern equipment promised in the Agriculture Clause. The country was moving, not just economically, but civically. This civic awakening was unprecedented. Burkina Faso had long suffered from disengagement, decades of failed reforms, rigged elections, and foreign puppetry left many feeling powerless. But now, for the first time, ordinary citizens felt that they had a role in shaping what comes next. Yet hope is fragile, and momentum is easy to lose. Delays started surfacing. Supply chain bottlenecks, bureaucratic miscommunication. One promised training center was postponed. Another steel site faced land disputes. Social media turned tense. This better not be another white elephant. Read one viral post. If my son doesn't get a job from this deal, Traoré can forget my vote, said a market vendor to a reporter. Transparency or nothing became a rallying cry. But something remarkable happened in response. Traoré didn't silence critics. He met with them. He invited student leaders, engineers, opposition members, and local journalists to monthly review councils. Project dashboards were broadcast on national television. Failures were admitted publicly, followed by immediate correction plans. The signal was clear. This deal will not hide behind bureaucracy. That signal had political consequences. Approval ratings for Traoré surged. Not because he delivered perfection, but because he delivered accountability. And in a country where leaders historically vanished behind palaces and promises, that alone felt revolutionary. But make no mistake, this is not yet victory. The factories are not finished. The jobs are not filled. The security risks remain. Corruption still lurks in dark corners. The political pressure will only grow, especially as 2026 elections approach. Every delayed shipment, every missed deadline, every broken promise will carry political weight. And Traoré, for all his boldness, is not immune to the system's rot. The civil and political fuse has been lit. It can illuminate a path forward or explode everything. The question now is, can this momentum survive reality? Or will it become another casualty of African hope? The American dilemma. What if Africa stops asking permission? For Washington, the Burkina Faso-India Pact is more than an oil deal. It is a strategic alarm bell. Since the Cold War, U.S. foreign policy in Africa has relied on three pillars: security assistance, development aid, and influence through multilateral institutions. But this deal challenges all three, not through hostility, through irrelevance. Because what do you do when a country stops asking you for permission? That's the dilemma the United States now faces. Traoré didn't call for American approval. He didn't wait for IMF nods or World Bank frameworks. He brokered a deal that delivers infrastructure, defense capacity, and industrialization, all without U.S. involvement. That, in itself, is a geopolitical message. In Capitol Hill briefings, the tone has shifted from concern to quiet panic. Some officials warn this could trigger a domino effect across the Sahel, where India, China, Turkey, and even Russia expand influence while the West clings to outdated aid-first models. Others raise security red flags. How do we monitor arms transfers? Who oversees technology flow? Yet they miss the deeper issue. Burkina Faso no longer sees itself as a client state. From the Pentagon's point of view, the $2 billion defense clause in the pact is the most alarming. A non-aligned African nation developing homegrown arms capacity with Indian tech? That's a nightmare for a military-industrial complex used to exporting security dependency. But the broader fear in D.C. isn't about rifles. It's about narrative control. For decades, the West shaped Africa's story. Who was stable? Who was corrupt? Who was democratic? Who needed help? But when a nation like Burkina Faso writes its own chapter on its own terms, that control begins to slip. This is not just America's problem. In Paris, the reaction is sharper. France, the former colonial ruler, views Traoré's move as both insult and revolution. The pact bypasses the CFA franc, challenges French energy monopolies, and undermines years of quiet dominance in West Africa. Germany, too, watches with mixed feelings. Berlin wants stability, but also investment opportunities. If India can offer both, while the EU dithers with paperwork, then Brussels becomes irrelevant. And then there's China. While Beijing plays the long game in Africa, offering infrastructure and loans, this pact represents a new type of competition, not just for resources, but for political loyalty. India just proved it can do what China does, but in a way that aligns with local sovereignty instead of erasing it. That is a paradigm shift. So now, the world is asking, if Burkina Faso can break free, who's next? Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal. How long until the balance tips and Africa stops being the next market and starts being the next power center? The answer may come sooner than anyone in the West expects. The road ahead between destiny and discipline. A $15 billion signature can shake headlines, but only discipline can build a nation. Burkina Faso now stands at the edge of two futures. One leads to transformation, the other to disappointment. And no blueprint, no matter how bold, can build itself. Factories are not enough. Laws must be enforced. Education must be modernized. Corruption must be rooted out. If the infrastructure comes, but the institutions stay broken, this dream collapses under its own weight. That's the paradox of power. It gives you a chance. It also gives you a test. Traoré's administration must prove that a revolutionary idea can survive bureaucratic reality. His ministers must manage timelines, budgets, contracts with transparency. His local governments must deliver results to everyday citizens, not just statistics for summit slides. And, above all, his people must believe, not in him, but in themselves. Because the true force behind this pact is not the oil, not the money, not the factories. It is the idea that Burkina Faso can lead its own story. That belief is fragile. It must be protected. The next 24 months are critical. India will begin deploying contractors. Machines will arrive. Construction will start. The lights will flicker. The jobs will open. But every delay, every broken promise, every act of corruption will be weaponized by those rooting for failure. Burkina Faso will not just be building roads and plants, it will be building trust. And that trust is not just national, it is continental. Mali is watching. Niger is watching. Guinea, Ghana, Togo, all watching to see if Traoré's gamble can bear fruit. Because if it does, it's no longer just Burkina Faso rising. It is a continental template. Africa's future will not be written in conference rooms in Brussels or New York. It will be written in workshops in Ouagadougou, on campuses in Bamako, on farmlands in Kaya. But that future depends on a simple question. Can the people who dared to demand sovereignty stay disciplined enough to deserve it? The fire next time. Will Burkina Faso ignite a continent? History does not move in straight lines. It erupts when the conditions are right, when the people are ready, and when someone dares to strike the match. In Ouagadougou, the match has been struck. The Traoré-Modi Pact is more than a deal. It is a fuse, and the fire it may light could reshape not just Burkina Faso, but the very architecture of African sovereignty. Imagine this, 2 years from now. Factories across Bobo Dioulasso hum with machinery. Steel rails are stamped with "Made in Burkina Faso." Energy grids connect rural villages to reliable power. Students graduate from training centers fluent in code, engineering, defense logistics. And other African leaders take note. Niger proposes a similar industrial pact. Ghana negotiates regional power sharing. Senegal starts rethinking its reliance on foreign loans. The dominoes fall, but upward. Africa stops waiting for permission. It starts building without apology. This is not a fantasy. It is a forecast. Because if Burkina Faso succeeds, the question will no longer be, can Africa rise? But rather, can the world keep up? Of course, the fire can still die out. Bureaucracy can choke it. Greed can poison it. Foreign pressure can drown it. But if it survives, it spreads. That is why this moment matters more than most people realize. This is not a mere story about oil or factories or aid alternatives. It is a story about agency, about Africans deciding they will no longer be passengers in global history, but drivers. It is a dangerous idea for those who prefer the status quo. It is a liberating one for those who have waited too long. So we leave you with this question. Will this be the moment history remembers as the turning point, or the opportunity that was lost once again to silence and sabotage? The answer, brothers and sisters, is still unwritten, and it depends not on the world, but on you. Because sometimes all it takes is one spark to light the fuse that sets a continent on fire. If you want to know what happens next in this continental uprising, subscribe, because the next chapter is just getting started.